Close your eyes and imagine this. You're lying on the cold, hard ground of a cave somewhere in what we now call France, 50,000 years ago. There's no mattress beneath you, no pillow cradling your head, no blanket except for the rough animal hide you managed to scrape clean after yesterday's hunt. The darkness is absolute, broken only by the dying embers of your fire. Something moves in the shadows beyond the cave entrance. Your muscles tense. Sleep in this moment isn't the peaceful surrender we know today. It's a negotiation with death itself. Tonight, I'm going to take you on a journey that'll blow your mind. We're diving deep into one of the most fundamental aspects of human existence that nobody really talks about. How the heck did our ancestors catch their Z's when beds, mattresses, and pillows didn't exist? And here's the kicker that's going to keep you listening. The way ancient humans slept might actually have been better for them than the way we sleep now. Yeah, you heard that right. Before we go any further into this wild ride through history, do me a solid and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for more stories like this one. And if you're digging what you're hearing, drop a like and let me know in the comments what aspect of ancient life you want me to cover next. All right, let's get into it. The story of human sleep begins long before we were even human. Picture this. 6 million years ago, our earliest ancestors were swinging through the trees of African forests, not much different from chimpanzees. These proto-humans, creatures that would eventually evolve into us, had a nightly ritual that was absolutely crucial to their survival. Every single evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the forest transformed into a nightmare of predators, they would construct something remarkable: sleeping nests. Now, when I say nests, I don't want you thinking about some flimsy bird's nest. These were architectural marvels in their own right. Our distant relatives would bend and weave branches together, creating circular platforms high up in the trees, sometimes 20 or 30 feet off the ground. They'd line these platforms with leaves, creating a surprisingly cushioned surface. The whole process took maybe 10 to 15 minutes, and they'd do it fresh every single night. Can you imagine that? Building your bed from scratch every evening? But here's where it gets really interesting. Scientists who study modern great apes have discovered something wild. Chimpanzees and gorillas still build these nests, and they're not just random constructions. These apes carefully select specific types of leaves that have natural insect-repelling properties. They position their nests to avoid branches that might harbor parasites. They even seem to choose locations based on structural integrity, avoiding dead wood that might collapse in the middle of the night. Our ancestors weren't just instinctively piling up leaves, they were engineers. Fast forward to about 2 million years ago, something massive happens. Homo erectus, one of our direct ancestors, starts spending more time on the ground. This is a huge deal, people. This decision, this shift from trees to terra firma, would change everything about how humans sleep. But why would they do something so seemingly suicidal? The African savanna at night was basically a buffet for predators. Lions, leopards, hyenas, wild dogs, everything wanted to eat you. The answer lies in fire. Homo erectus had learned to control fire, and this changed the entire game. Imagine being one of these early humans. You're part of a small group, maybe 15 or 20 individuals. As darkness approaches, instead of scrambling up into the trees, someone in your group tends to a carefully maintained fire. The flames dance and crackle, pushing back the darkness. The predators that would normally hunt you hesitate at the edge of the firelight. Their eyes glow in the darkness, watching but not approaching. You and your clan arrange yourselves in a circle around this fire. There's no random sprawling out. Everyone has a position, and it's probably based on a complex social hierarchy we can barely understand. The
The strongest adults might position themselves at the outer edge between the fire and the darkness. The children and the elderly huddle closer to the warmth. You're lying on bare earth, maybe with a few gathered grasses or leaves beneath you. The ground is hard, unforgiving. Your hip bone presses into the soil. But you know what? You're exhausted from a day of walking maybe 10 to 15 miles, hunting, gathering, processing food with primitive tools. Your body doesn't care about comfort, it just needs rest.
And here's something that's going to blow your mind. Archaeological evidence suggests these early humans didn't sleep the way we do. They didn't knock out for 8 straight hours. Nope. They practiced what scientists call biphasic or polyphasic sleep. They sleep in chunks, maybe 3 or 4 hours, then wake up for a couple of hours in the middle of the night, then sleep again until dawn. During those wakeful midnight hours, something magical happened. This is the time when stories were told, when knowledge was passed down, when the tribe bonded. An older member of the group might tend the fire and share tales of successful hunts, dangerous encounters, or the location of good water sources. The darkness beyond the firelight became a canvas for the human imagination. This is when mythology was born, when religion began to take shape, when humans started being truly human. But let's talk about the actual physical sleeping situation because it's fascinating. These folks weren't just flopping down anywhere. Recent studies of modern hunter-gatherer tribes who still live similarly to our ancient ancestors have revealed some incredible details. The Hadza people of Tanzania, one of the last true hunter-gatherer societies, show us what ancient sleep probably looked like. The Hadza sleep directly on the ground, usually on dried grasses or animal hides if they have them. But here's the interesting part. They don't sleep flat on their backs like we're told is proper. They curl up, fetal position style, often huddled together with family members. Body heat becomes a shared resource. In cooler weather, you might have 3 or 4 people pressed together, sharing warmth. Privacy, as we understand it, didn't exist. Sleep was communal, intimate, vulnerable. The sounds of the night become your alarm system. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the brush, every distant animal call is processed by your sleeping brain. You're never fully unconscious. It's more like you're dimming your awareness rather than shutting it off completely. This hypervigilance is exhausting in its own way, but it's also what keeps you alive. Now let's jump forward to around 40,000 years ago. This is when things start to get really sophisticated. Homo sapiens, modern humans, are spreading across the globe. They've reached Europe, Asia, Australia, and everywhere they go, they're figuring out new ways to deal with the sleeping situation. In Europe, during the last ice age, humans are living in caves and rock shelters. The archaeological site of Dolní Věstonice in what's now the Czech Republic gives us an incredible window into how these people lived and slept. These Ice Age Europeans were dealing with brutal conditions. We're talking about average winter temperatures well below zero, howling winds, and months of limited daylight. So what did they do? They got creative. These folks would dig shallow pits into the cave floor, kind of like recessed sleeping spaces. Then they'd line these pits with layers and layers of dried grasses, moss, and other plant materials. On top of that, animal furs, lots of them. Mammoth hide, reindeer fur, wolf pelts, whatever they could get their hands on. The effect was actually pretty ingenious. The pit protected them from cold air flowing across the cave floor. The plant materials provided insulation from the frozen ground. The furs trapped body heat. But here's where it gets even more interesting. These sleeping pits weren't arranged randomly. They were positioned strategically near fire hearths, but not too close. Close enough to benefit from residual warmth, far enough to avoid sparks. The arrangement of these sleeping spaces tells us about social structures. Certain pits are larger, suggesting family units. Others are positioned more prominently, maybe indicating status. And get this, archaeologists have found evidence of what might be the world's first pillows at some of these sites. Not pillows like we think of them, but stones that have been carefully smoothed and positioned at the head of sleeping areas. Some of these stones show wear patterns consistent with having fabric or leather wrapped around them. Our Ice Age ancestors were literally creating ergonomic sleeping surfaces with Stone Age technology. Meanwhile, in Africa, where our species first evolved, sleeping arrangements looked totally different.
In tropical and subtropical regions, the ground wasn't frozen, but it presented its own challenges. Insects, snakes, scorpions, and other creepy crawlies made sleeping directly on the earth dangerous. So what did people do? Evidence from sites like Border Cave in South Africa, which has been continuously occupied for about 200,000 years, shows us something remarkable. Ancient humans there were creating elaborate sleeping surfaces made entirely from plant materials. We're talking about carefully constructed grass bedding that was over a foot thick in some cases. But here's the really cool part. They weren't just piling up any old grass. They were selecting specific species of grass that naturally repel insects. One type in particular, Cryptocarya woody, contains chemicals that keep mosquitoes and other biting insects away.
These sleeping mats weren't permanent either. The ancient residents of Border Cave would regularly burn their old bedding and create fresh sleeping surfaces. This wasn't just about cleanliness, though that was part of it. It was pest control. By burning the old bedding, they'd destroy any insect eggs or parasites that had taken up residence. Then they'd start fresh. The ash from the burned bedding would even serve as an additional insect deterrent for the new mat. This is the kind of sophisticated ecological knowledge that blows my mind. These people didn't have Google. They couldn't look up which plants repel insects. This was knowledge accumulated over generations, passed down through careful observation and experimentation. Think about it. Someone, thousands of years ago, noticed that sleeping on certain types of grass resulted in fewer bug bites. They shared this information. It became cultural knowledge. That's incredible. Now, if you're enjoying this deep dive into ancient sleep, make sure you've subscribed to the channel. We're just getting started, and trust me, the stuff coming up is going to get even wilder. Drop a like if you're learning something new, and comment below with your thoughts. Would you be able to handle sleeping like our ancestors did? All right, let's keep going. Let's travel to ancient Egypt around 5,000 years ago. This is where we start seeing the earliest evidence of what we might actually call furniture designed for sleeping. But before you start thinking the Egyptians had it all figured out, let me paint you a picture of what sleep looked like for most people in ancient Egypt. If you were a common farmer or laborer, you weren't sleeping on anything fancy. You'd have a simple mud brick home with a packed earth floor. Your bed was basically a woven reed mat laid directly on that floor. Maybe, if you were doing okay, you'd have a thin linen sheet to cover yourself with. That's it. The temperature inside these homes during summer could easily reach over 100 degrees. You'd sleep on the roof during hot months, hoping for a breeze, mosquitoes and all. But the wealthy Egyptians, they started innovating. Archaeological evidence shows they created what might be the world's first true beds. These weren't like modern beds, though. They were basically wooden frames with woven reed or rope surfaces elevated off the ground by a few inches to a foot. Here's the weird part, though. These beds were angled, not flat, but tilted, with the head end higher than the foot end. Nobody's entirely sure why. Some theories suggest it helped with breathing in dusty conditions or prevented blood from pooling in the head. And the pillows? Oh man, you're not going to believe this. Egyptian pillows, at least for the wealthy, weren't soft. They were hard wooden or stone headrests, basically curved pieces of wood or stone that supported your neck while your head hung off the back. Sounds uncomfortable as hell, right? But there was actually some logic to it. In the intense Egyptian heat, a hard headrest meant air could circulate around your head. Plus, it kept your elaborately styled hair off the ground and maintained your hairstyle. The really wealthy Egyptians took this even further. Tutankhamun's tomb, when it was discovered, contained multiple headrests, some made of ivory and decorated with protective deities. The symbolism was deep. The headrest represented the horizon where the sun god Ra was reborn each morning. By sleeping with your head on this sacred symbol, you were participating in the daily cycle of death and rebirth. Sleep wasn't just physical rest, it was a spiritual act. But here's what really gets me. Even with these fancy beds and headrests, Egyptians still understood that sleep position mattered.
Medical papyri from ancient Egypt contain instructions about healthy sleeping positions. They recognized that how you slept affected your health. They didn't have our modern understanding of spinal alignment or sleep apnea, but they were observing and documenting the connection between sleep posture and well-being. Let's hop over to ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where civilization as we know it really got its start. The Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians had their own unique approaches to sleep. Most people in these ancient cities slept on the flat roofs of their homes during warm weather. The roofs were multi-purpose spaces. During the day, they were work areas for drying food, processing wool, and doing household tasks. At night, they transformed into sleeping quarters. Families would carry reed mats and thin blankets up to the roof as the sun set. In a city like Ur or Babylon, you'd have hundreds, maybe thousands of people, all bedding down on their roofs simultaneously. Can you imagine the sounds? The murmur of conversations, babies crying, the occasional argument, dogs barking, the call of night birds. Sleep in ancient Mesopotamia was anything but silent or isolated.
The wealthy classes in Mesopotamia did have actual furniture for sleeping. Archaeological digs have uncovered evidence of beds with legs, sometimes quite elaborate, decorated with carved posts and inlays. But here's what's fascinating. Even the rich didn't necessarily sleep alone in private bedrooms like we do. Extended families often shared sleeping spaces, multiple generations in one room. The concept of individual bedrooms is actually relatively modern. In winter, when roof sleeping wasn't practical, families moved to the ground floor. They'd sleep in the main living area, close to whatever heat source they had, usually a small brazier or fire pit. The rooms were small, the air was smoky, and everyone was packed together. Again, body heat was a shared resource. Warmth meant survival. The Mesopotamians also had this interesting practice of dream interpretation that was tied to sleep spaces. Where you slept, how you positioned your bed, what direction you faced, all of this was believed to influence your dreams. Dreams were considered messages from the gods, and there were professional dream interpreters who could be consulted. Certain sleeping positions were believed to invite prophetic dreams. Others might attract demons. This brings up something important. For ancient people, sleep wasn't just a biological function. It was loaded with spiritual and supernatural significance. The vulnerability of sleep, the altered consciousness, the vivid dreams, all of this suggested that sleep was a time when the barrier between the physical and spiritual worlds became thin. You weren't just resting, you were entering another realm. Now let's jump to ancient Greece and Rome, where attitudes about sleep and sleeping conditions start to look more familiar to us, but with some wild differences. In ancient Greece, around the 5th century BCE, we start seeing the development of what we'd recognize as beds. The Greeks called them clines, and they served multiple purposes. During the day, you'd recline on your cline for meals. Greeks didn't sit at tables like we do. They lounged on these couches. At night, the same piece of furniture became your bed. Pretty efficient, right? Greek clines were essentially wooden frames with rope or leather strapping to create a supportive surface. On top of that, you'd pile cushions and blankets. The whole thing was raised off the ground on decorative legs. If you were wealthy, your cline might be made of expensive woods and decorated with inlays of ivory or precious metals. The mattresses were stuffed with wool, feathers, or straw, depending on what you could afford. But here's the thing. Most Greeks, the regular folks, weren't sleeping on fancy clines. They slept on simple pallets or directly on floors covered with rushes or straw. If you were a slave, which was a huge portion of the population, you slept wherever there was space, often in hallways or in the corner of the room where you worked. No privacy, no comfort, just exhaustion and the hard ground. The Romans took Greek sleeping culture and, like they did with everything, made it more elaborate and more decadent. Roman beds, lectus in Latin, became status symbols. The wealthy Romans had different types of beds for different purposes. There was the lectus cubicularis for sleeping,
the lectus genialis, which was a marriage bed, and the lectus triclinaris for dining. Roman sleeping beds were often incredibly elaborate. We're talking bronze frames, mattresses stuffed with goose down for the very wealthy, silk and linen covers, multiple pillows. The emperor's bed? Absolutely obscene, decorated with gold, jewels, the finest fabrics from across the empire. Sleep had become not just a necessity, but a display of wealth and power.
But even in Rome, most people weren't living like emperors. The average Roman, especially in the crowded apartment buildings called insulae in Rome itself, slept in cramped conditions that would make a modern studio apartment look spacious. Entire families in single rooms, thin straw mattresses if they were lucky, noise from the street below, smoke from cooking fires, the smell of too many humans in too little space. Roman soldiers, when they were on campaign, had a completely different sleeping situation. They carried leather tents and would set up massive fortified camps every single night. Inside these tents, soldiers slept on simple camp beds or directly on the ground on their cloaks. They'd arrange themselves in groups, always ready to grab weapons if the camp was attacked. Sleep was tactical, not restful. Here's something wild about Roman sleep culture. They were obsessed with dreams and their meanings. They believed dreams could predict the future, reveal hidden truths, or provide divine guidance. There were professional dream interpreters, and people would make offerings to gods for good dreams or protection from nightmares. The way you slept, what you wore to bed, even what you ate before sleeping, all of this was thought to influence your dreams. Romans also had this concept that's pretty similar to what modern science has discovered. They believed in different stages of sleep, and that the deeper stages were the most restorative. They didn't have EEG machines or sleep labs, but they were paying attention to their own experiences. They noticed that the first few hours of sleep felt different from the pre-dawn hours. They weren't far off from what we now know about sleep cycles. Now, while all this is happening in the Mediterranean world, let's check in with what's going on in other parts of the globe, because the story of sleep is truly worldwide. In ancient China, sleeping arrangements evolved in fascinating ways. The Chinese developed the kang, a raised platform made of brick or clay with channels underneath where warm air from a fire could circulate. Imagine sleeping on a heated bed in the middle of winter without electricity. That's what the kang provided. These platforms were often large enough for entire families to sleep together, huddled under thick quilts filled with silk or cotton. The Chinese also developed the concept of the pillow in ways that were different from both the hard Egyptian headrests and the soft Roman cushions. Chinese pillows were often made of hard materials like wood, bamboo, or ceramic, but they were shaped in ways that supported the neck while keeping the head cool. Some Chinese medical texts from over 2,000 years ago discussed the importance of proper neck support during sleep for overall health. They were onto something that modern chiropractors would totally agree with. In Japan, sleeping arrangements were influenced by space constraints and aesthetic principles. The Japanese developed the futon, a thin mattress that could be rolled up and stored during the day, maximizing the use of limited space. The pillow, called a makura, was often a small block of wood or a cushion filled with buckwheat hulls. Sleeping close to the ground was seen as maintaining a connection with the earth and promoting humility. Let me take you to the Americas now, because the indigenous peoples of North and South America had their own incredibly diverse and sophisticated sleeping cultures that developed completely independently from the Old World. In the Arctic regions, the Inuit and other indigenous peoples dealt with some of the most extreme sleeping conditions imaginable. We're talking about environments where winter temperatures could drop to 40 or 50 below zero. How do you sleep in that? The answer is genius-level adaptation. Inuit families would build igloos or live in sod houses partly underground. Inside these structures, they'd create raised sleeping platforms made of snow blocks covered with layers of caribou or seal hides. But here's the brilliant part. By sleeping on a raised platform, they positioned themselves in the warmest air layer of the dwelling. Heat rises, remember? The coldest air would sink to the floor. By sleeping elevated, they maximized warmth. They'd also sleep in close family groups under piles of furs, often naked or nearly naked.
This sounds crazy, but it makes perfect sense. Clothes can get damp from body moisture and then freeze. By sleeping skin to skin under furs, they shared body heat efficiently and kept their outer clothing dry for the next day. It was survival engineering at its finest.
In the forests of the Pacific Northwest, indigenous peoples like the Haida, Tlingit, and Coast Salish had access to abundant wood resources. They built massive wooden longhouses that could accommodate dozens or even hundreds of people from an extended family or clan. Inside these longhouses, sleeping platforms were built along the walls, raised off the ground. Each family unit would have their own section, divided by hanging mats or screens for minimal privacy. These sleeping platforms were covered with woven cedar bark mats and piled with fur blankets. The center of the longhouse had fire pits for warmth and cooking. On cold, rainy nights, everyone would be inside, the firelight dancing on the massive carved posts that supported the roof, the sound of rain on cedar planks overhead, maybe someone telling stories or singing. Sleep happened in this communal, smoky, warm environment that was equal parts bedroom, living room, and social center. Down in the southwestern United States, the Pueblo peoples developed cliff dwellings and adobe structures that were perfectly adapted to the desert environment. During the scorching summer days, the thick adobe walls absorbed heat slowly. At night, when temperatures could drop dramatically, those same walls would release that stored heat, keeping the interior comfortable. Sleeping spaces were typically small rooms with floors covered in woven mats or blankets made from cotton or yucca fiber. In the Great Plains, nomadic tribes like the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Comanche lived in teepees that were mobile but surprisingly comfortable. The interior of a well-made teepee could stay warm in winter with a small fire and cold in summer with proper ventilation. Sleeping arrangements followed a specific pattern based on age and status. The back of the teepee, farthest from the entrance, was the most prestigious sleeping spot, reserved for elders or important guests. Younger people slept closer to the entrance. They'd sleep on buffalo robes or blankets spread directly on the ground, or on willow backrests that could be adjusted for sleeping. The fire in the center provided warmth, and the smoke hole at the top created a natural draft that pulled smoke up and out. On winter nights with the wind howling outside, you'd be warm and comfortable inside a structure made of buffalo hide and wooden poles. Pretty impressive. I want you to notice something here. Are you still listening? Because this is important. Across every culture, every environment, every time period, humans figured out how to sleep in ways that worked for their specific circumstances. There wasn't one right way. There were thousands of right ways, each adapted to local conditions, available materials, and cultural values. And here's something that should make you think. Many of these ancient sleeping arrangements had features that modern sleep scientists are rediscovering as beneficial. Sleeping in cooler environments, having appropriate neck support, sleeping in sync with natural light cycles, being close to family members. Our ancestors weren't doing these things because they read sleep studies. They were doing them because that's what worked. Before we go further, if you're finding this as fascinating as I am, make sure you've hit that subscribe button. And seriously, drop a comment below. What ancient sleeping practice do you think sounds most comfortable or most uncomfortable? I want to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to like this video if you're enjoying it. All right, let's continue this journey. Now I want to take you to a period that really changed everything about sleep in human history, the Middle Ages in Europe, roughly from the 5th to the 15th century. This era doesn't get enough credit for how weird and fascinating it was, especially when it comes to sleep. First off, let's talk about peasant life, because that was the vast majority of people. If you were a medieval peasant, your sleeping situation was pretty rough. You lived in a small cottage, maybe 1 or 2 rooms total. The floor was usually packed earth, maybe covered with straw or rushes. Your entire family, possibly including animals like chickens or a pig, shared this space.
At night, you'd pile into a communal sleeping area. This might be a simple platform raised slightly off the floor or just a designated corner with extra straw for cushioning. Blankets were precious items, often made of rough wool. You slept in your clothes or in a simple linen shift if you had one. Bathing was rare, so everyone was, let's be honest, pretty ripe. But when everyone smells, nobody smells, right? The entire family in one bed was completely normal. Parents, kids, sometimes grandparents, all piled together. Privacy didn't exist. The concept of children having their own rooms? That's a modern invention. Heck, the concept of separate bedrooms for adults was rare. In winter, you were grateful for all those bodies generating heat. The animals indoors helped too. Their body heat could make the difference between freezing and surviving. But here's where it gets really interesting. Medieval people didn't sleep the way we do. Historical records and literary sources from the period reveal that most people practiced biphasic sleep. They'd sleep for about 4 hours after dark, wake up for 2 or 3 hours in the middle of the night, then sleep for another 4 hours until dawn. This middle-of-the-night wake period had a name, the first sleep and the second sleep. And the time in between, that was considered a special time. People would use these midnight hours for prayer, for sex, for quiet contemplation, for visiting neighbors, or for creative work. There are medieval prayer books with special prayers designated for the middle of the night. There are records of people visiting neighbors for conversation during these wakeful hours. It was just a normal part of the sleep pattern. Think about this from a practical standpoint. Without electric lights, once the sun went down, there wasn't much you could do. The expense of candles meant most people went to bed when it got dark. But going to bed at 7 or 8 p.m. and sleeping straight through until dawn would mean 10 or 12 hours of sleep. That's a lot. The biphasic pattern meant you'd get about 8 hours total, but spread across the night with a break in between. Now let's look at the nobility and the wealthy. Their sleeping situations were dramatically different. A wealthy medieval lord or lady would have an actual bed, and this was a piece of furniture that showed your status. We're talking about massive wooden structures, often with carved posts, sometimes with a canopy. The canopy wasn't just decorative, it served important functions. It provided privacy in rooms that might have multiple beds or where servants slept. It kept drafts off you, and it prevented bugs or even bats from falling on you from the ceiling. The mattress would be a large cloth sack stuffed with straw, wool, or feathers. On top of that, multiple layers of linens and blankets. Sheets were a luxury item. Clean sheets were even more luxurious. Wealthy people might have their sheets changed weekly or monthly. Everyone else just dealt with whatever level of cleanliness they had. These fancy beds were so valuable that they were often listed in wills and passed down as inheritance. A good bed could cost as much as a house. When you traveled, you'd often bring your own bed with you, disassembled and transported in a cart. Arriving at someone's house and having to sleep in an unfamiliar bed was not just uncomfortable, but potentially dangerous. Who knew what might be lurking in someone else's mattress? And let me tell you about the bugs. Oh man, the bugs. Bed bugs were absolutely everywhere in medieval times. Lice, fleas, bed bugs, you name it. Every single bed probably had them. People tried everything to combat them. They'd sprinkle dried herbs, they'd pour oil on the bed frame, they'd regularly replace straw mattresses. Nothing really worked. You just accepted that you'd be bitten while you slept. That was life. The medieval church had a lot to say about sleep too. Too much sleep was considered a sin, the sin of sloth. But sleep itself was necessary and even holy. Monks and nuns followed rigid sleep schedules tied to prayer cycles. They'd wake multiple times during the night for prayer services. The divine office required prayer at set hours throughout the day and night. Matins was typically said around 2 or 3 a.m., right in the middle of that wakeful period between first and second sleep.
This religious influence on sleep patterns affected everyone, not just clergy. Church bells would ring throughout the night, calling the faithful to prayer even if they were at home. The sound of those bells structured the night, giving people a sense of time, even in complete darkness. It's hard for us to imagine now when we can check our phones instantly to see what time it is. But medieval people navigated the night by sound and by their internal sense of time. There was also this fascinating belief in medieval culture about dreams and sleep position. Sleeping on your back was considered dangerous because demons could easily possess you in that position. Sleeping on your stomach was sinful because it could lead to lustful thoughts or, for men, nocturnal emissions. The proper Christian sleeping position was on your right side. This supposedly aided digestion and kept your heart on the upper side of your body, protecting it. Medieval medical texts, which were based on ancient Greek and Roman humoral theory, had elaborate theories about sleep. They believed your health depended on balancing 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Different sleeping positions, different mattress materials, even the direction your bed faced, all of this supposedly affected your humoral balance. It was complex pseudoscience, but it shows how seriously they took sleep's impact on health.
Let's talk about castles for a minute, because sleeping in a castle was not like what movies show you. First of all, castles were cold. Stone walls, drafty windows, no central heating. In winter, you might have a fireplace in your bedchamber if you were important enough, but that only heated one wall. The rest of the room stayed cold. Castles were also noisy. The sounds echoed off stone walls, guards walking the battlements, animals in the courtyard, the wind howling through gaps in the stone. It all contributed to a soundscape that was anything but quiet. Privacy in castles was limited even for the nobility. A lord and lady might have their own bedchamber, but servants slept in the same room or in an adjacent small chamber with the door open. They needed to be available immediately if called. Lower-ranking members of the household slept in the Great Hall, literally on the floor or on benches, using their cloaks as blankets. Knights and soldiers garrisoned in castles often slept in barracks or guard rooms. They'd have simple cots or sleep on straw pallets, always ready to grab weapons and respond to threats. Sleep was light, alert, never fully relaxed. The toll this took on mental health must have been significant, though medieval people didn't have the language to describe PTSD or chronic sleep deprivation the way we do now. In monasteries, the sleeping arrangements reflected the monastic values of simplicity and humility. Monks typically slept in a communal dormitory, each with a simple, narrow bed or just a straw mattress on a raised platform. No privacy curtains, no personal space. The point was to avoid attachment to comfort and to maintain community even in sleep. The abbot might have a slightly better arrangement, but even his accommodations would seem austere by modern standards. The rule of Saint Benedict, which governed many monasteries, had specific instructions about sleep. Monks were to sleep clothed, wearing their belts, so they'd be ready to wake immediately for midnight prayers. They were supposed to sleep in their habits, basically, ready to go. Sleep wasn't a time to let your guard down. It was just a necessary interruption in the continuous cycle of prayer and work. Now let's jump to an aspect of medieval sleep that's really dark and really important: infant sleep and mortality. In medieval times, infant mortality was catastrophic. Somewhere between 30 and 50% of children died before age 5. Many of these deaths happened during sleep. Sudden infant death syndrome, suffocation, disease, you name it. There was also a horrific problem called overlaying, where a parent or sibling would roll onto an infant during sleep and suffocate them. Whether this was always accidental is a grim question. In times of extreme poverty, or when another mouth to feed seemed impossible, overlaying might have been a tragic solution. The church certainly suspected this happened and preached against it vehemently.
Some regions tried to enforce the use of wooden cradles to prevent overlaying, but cradles were expensive. Babies who survived infancy faced other sleep-related challenges. Teething was agonizing without modern pain relief. Illness was constant. The remedies used to try to soothe babies to sleep were sometimes more dangerous than the problems they addressed. Poppy syrup, alcohol, various herbal concoctions, some of these could be fatal. But desperate parents trying to get some sleep themselves might risk it. The lullaby, as we know it, comes from this era. The word literally means to lull, to soothe. Medieval lullabies were often dark, warning of demons or wolves that might come if the baby didn't sleep. They reflected the very real dangers that parents feared. Sleep for medieval parents was anxious, interrupted, and haunted by the possibility of waking to find their child dead. I know this has gotten heavy, but it's important to understand. The history of human sleep isn't just about comfort and furniture. It's about survival, about the daily negotiation with danger, disease, and death. Our ancestors slept knowing each night might be their last or their child's last. We've lost that immediate fear, and that's a good thing. But it's also made us forget how precious and how hard-won safe sleep truly is. If you're still with me, thank you. This journey through history gets dark sometimes, but it's real. It's our story. Hit that like button if you're appreciating this deep dive, and definitely drop a comment. What aspect of medieval life would you want to experience, even just for a day? Let me know below.
All right, let's move forward in time. The Renaissance is coming, and with it some major shifts in how people think about sleep and privacy. The Renaissance period, roughly the 14th to 17th centuries, brought massive changes to European society. Art, science, philosophy, all of it was transforming. And sleep? Sleep was changing too, though maybe not in the ways you'd expect. The printing press, invented by Gutenberg around 1440, started to change nighttime activities. Before this, books were rare and expensive, hand-copied by monks, but printed books became increasingly available. People who could read, which was still a minority but a growing one, now had something to do with artificial light. If you could afford candles or oil lamps, you could read at night. This started to shift sleep patterns slightly later. But let's be real, most people were still farmers and laborers. The sun still dictated their schedules. The Renaissance was more of an urban, wealthy phenomenon. For the average person, sleeping arrangements hadn't changed much from medieval times. You still had the whole family in one room, maybe one bed, animals possibly inside during winter. The same struggles with cold, bugs, and disease. However, among the wealthy and the emerging merchant class, we start seeing something new. The concept of the bedroom as a private space starts to develop. Previously, even wealthy people slept in rooms that served multiple purposes and where servants had access. But Renaissance nobility began creating dedicated bedchambers with locks on the doors. Privacy during sleep became a status symbol. The beds themselves became even more elaborate. We're talking massive four-poster beds with heavy curtains that could be completely closed, creating a room within a room. These bed curtains served multiple purposes. Privacy, obviously, but also warmth. When you closed those heavy fabric curtains, you created a smaller space that your body heat could warm up. In drafty Renaissance palaces, this made a real difference. Some of these beds were absolutely massive. The Great Bed of Ware, built in England around 1590, is over 10 feet wide and over 11 feet long. It could supposedly sleep 4 couples comfortably. Why would you need a bed that big? Partly because it was a tourist attraction even back then, a novelty. But it also reflects the fact that beds were still often shared spaces where multiple people slept. Renaissance Italy, particularly in cities like Florence and Venice, developed some unique sleeping customs. Wealthy Italians became obsessed with fresh air and its effect on health.
There was this theory that night air was dangerous and caused disease, so people would sleep with windows closed tight and heavy curtains drawn. The air in these rooms must have been absolutely stifling, especially in summer, but they believed they were protecting themselves from bad vapors and miasmas. On the flip side, there was also a movement that believed exposure to moonlight during sleep was dangerous, causing madness. The word lunatic literally comes from luna, moon. People would go to great lengths to ensure moonlight didn't fall on them while they slept. They'd position beds carefully, use shutters, arrange curtains. The moon was both beautiful and terrifying to Renaissance minds. In Shakespeare's England, the late 16th and early 17th centuries, we get some fascinating glimpses into sleeping habits from his plays and from other contemporary sources. The phrase, "to go to bed with the lamb and rise with the lark," shows up in writings from this era, suggesting that rural people still followed solar rhythms. But city dwellers, especially in London, were staying up later. Theaters performed in the afternoon because there was no good way to light them at night, but taverns and alehouses stayed open after dark. For the first time, you had a significant number of people deliberately staying awake for entertainment after sunset. This is the beginning of nightlife as a concept. Shakespeare's plays are full of references to sleep and dreams. To sleep, perchance to dream, is probably the most famous, but there are dozens of others. Macbeth murders sleep itself in his guilt. Characters have prophetic dreams, nightmares, sleepwalking scenes. This reflects how important and mysterious sleep still was to people of this era. It wasn't just rest, it was a state where anything could happen. Let's talk about what actually happened in these Renaissance beds, because it's not all just sleeping. Beds were social spaces. In wealthy households, it was perfectly normal to receive visitors while in bed. If you were important enough, people would attend your lever, the moment you woke up and got out of bed, or your coucher when you went to bed. These were social events. Courtiers and visitors would watch, chat, and conduct business while you were literally getting in or out of bed.
This seems wild to us now, but privacy, as we understand it, didn't exist. Your body and its functions weren't considered as intensely personal as we view them today. People were more communal, less individualistic. The bed was just another space where life happened. Now let's cross the Atlantic and see what was happening in the Americas during the Age of Exploration and Colonization. When European colonists arrived in the Americas, starting in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, they encountered indigenous sleeping practices that seemed primitive to them, but they also had to adapt to environments that were totally unfamiliar. A Spanish conquistador in the jungles of Central America couldn't sleep the way he did back in Castile. The heat, the humidity, the insects, all of it required adaptation. Early colonists in places like Jamestown and Plymouth faced brutal conditions. The first winters were catastrophic. People died by the dozens from cold, disease, and starvation. Sleeping arrangements were makeshift at best. In Jamestown's early days, colonists were sleeping in quickly constructed shelters that barely kept out the wind and rain. They had brought some supplies from England, maybe blankets and clothing, but not enough. They hadn't prepared for how harsh the American wilderness could be. The Native Americans they encountered had sleeping arrangements perfectly adapted to the local environment, developed over thousands of years, but the colonists were often too arrogant or too desperate to learn. When they did adopt indigenous practices, like building with local materials or using specific types of bedding, it was usually after suffering unnecessarily. In the Caribbean and South America, Spanish colonists adopted the hamaca, which we now call a hammock. This was an indigenous invention used by the Taíno people and other Caribbean tribes. The hammock was genius for tropical climates. You're elevated off the ground, away from crawling insects and snakes. Air circulates all around you, keeping you cooler. You can position it under shelter from rain, but still get a breeze.
Spanish sailors started using hammocks on ships, and they revolutionized naval sleeping arrangements. Before hammocks, sailors slept on deck or in tiny bunks that were breeding grounds for disease. Hammocks could be packed away during the day, hung close together at night to maximize space, and they swayed with the ship's movement rather than fighting against it. By the 17th century, hammocks were standard on European naval vessels. Back on land in colonial America, as settlements became more established, sleeping arrangements started to reflect European norms adapted to local conditions. A typical colonial home, whether in New England or Virginia, would have one or two main rooms. In New England, the central chimney provided heat to the whole house. Bedrooms, if they existed as separate spaces, were small rooms off the main living area. Many colonial families had trundle beds, which were low beds on wheels that could be stored under a larger bed during the day and pulled out at night. Children slept on these. The parents got the main bed. If you had servants or slaves, they slept wherever there was space, often in attics, in the kitchen near the fire, or in separate outbuildings. The mattresses were usually called ticks, cloth sacks stuffed with straw, corn husks, or if you were lucky, feathers. You'd have to refill or replace the stuffing regularly because it would compress, get moldy, or become infested with bugs. Doing laundry in colonial times was an enormous task, so bedding didn't get washed as often as it should have. You just lived with whatever level of grime accumulated. In the southern colonies, where summers were hot and humid, many families slept on screened porches during warm months. The screens, made of fabric or fine mesh, kept out mosquitoes, which were not just annoying, but carried malaria and yellow fever. Mosquito-borne diseases killed thousands of colonists. Where and how you slept could literally determine whether you lived or died. Enslaved Africans in the American colonies, and later the United States, faced horrific sleeping conditions that are hard to even comprehend. On plantations, slaves were housed in small cabins, often dirt-floored, with minimal furnishings. Multiple families might share a single cabin. The beds, if you could call them that, were usually rough wooden platforms with a bit of straw or rags for cushioning. In winter, inadequate heating meant people huddled together for warmth. In summer, the stifling heat and swarms of insects made sleep nearly impossible.
The trauma of sleeping in these conditions, always under threat, always exhausted from brutal labor, never truly safe, this had impacts that rippled through generations. Sleep was never restful. It was just a brief escape from waking horror. And yet, in these cabins, African American culture was preserved and developed. Stories were told, songs were sung, strategies for survival and resistance were planned. Sleep time, or the evening hours before sleep, became precious for maintaining humanity in an inhuman system. Let me take you now to the 18th century, because things are about to get really interesting. The Age of Enlightenment brought new ideas about science, reason, and the human body, and people started thinking about sleep differently. Doctors and natural philosophers began studying sleep more systematically. They didn't have modern tools, but they were observing and theorizing. Some thinkers proposed that sleep was like a kind of death, a shutting down of the vital forces. Others argued it was more like a different state of consciousness. There were debates about whether the soul left the body during sleep or stayed put. Benjamin Franklin, the ultimate life hacker of his era, had all kinds of opinions about sleep. He believed in fresh air and would sleep with his windows open even in winter, which his wife hated. He invented various contraptions to improve sleep, though most didn't catch on. He also coined the phrase, "Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise," which has been annoying teenagers ever since. But here's what's really significant about the 18th century. The Industrial Revolution was beginning, and it was about to completely transform human sleep patterns in ways that we're still dealing with today. Before industrialization,
Most people's sleep was tied to agricultural rhythms. You worked during daylight, you rested at night. Sure, there was seasonal variations. During harvest, you might work longer hours. In winter, you might sleep more. But overall, your schedule followed the sun. Factories changed everything. Suddenly, work was dictated by machines and production schedules, not by sunlight. Factory owners wanted their expensive machinery running as many hours as possible, so they instituted shift work. Some workers would work during the day, others at night. The concept of the night shift was born, and it was brutal. Humans are diurnal creatures. We're built to be awake during the day and asleep at night. Our circadian rhythms, the internal biological clocks that regulate sleep and wakefulness, are synchronized to the solar cycle. Night shift work fights against millions of years of evolution. The factory workers forced to work nights suffered immensely. They were always tired, prone to accidents, and developed all kinds of health problems. The workers who labored during the day weren't much better off. Factory work was exhausting. 12, 14, even 16-hour shifts were common. When you finally got home, you'd collapse into whatever bed you had, often in overcrowded, poorly ventilated housing. Sleep was no longer restorative. It was just a brief unconsciousness before the next shift. Children worked in factories too. Kids as young as 5 or 6 years old working full shifts. They'd fall asleep standing at their machines. Accidents were common and horrific. The sleep deprivation of child workers in the Industrial Revolution is one of the darkest chapters in human history. The housing situation in industrial cities was a nightmare. Workers lived in tenements, often whole families in single rooms. Multiple families might share buildings with inadequate sanitation. Beds were luxury items that many couldn't afford. People would rent sleeping spots, literally just a place on a floor or a shared bed where you'd sleep in shifts. Hot bedding was a practice, where you'd rent a bed for 8 hours. Then when you left for your shift, someone else would rent the same bed, still warm from your body heat. Gross and depressing. There's this famous image from the 19th century of a penny hang. This was a cheap accommodation for the absolutely destitute. You'd pay a penny to drape yourself over a rope stretched across a room, maybe with other people on either side of you. You'd lean forward, rest your arms on the rope, and try to sleep standing up or in a crouched position. In the morning, the proprietor would cut or drop the rope, and everyone would wake up and stagger out. That's how bad it got for some people. But while the working class suffered, something interesting was happening among the middle and upper classes. They were becoming obsessed with sleep hygiene and bedroom design. The Victorian era, named after Queen Victoria, who reigned from 1837 to 1901, was a time of intense moralizing about every aspect of life, including sleep. Victorians believed that proper sleep was a moral issue. They wrote endless guides on the correct way to sleep. Your bedroom should be well ventilated but not drafty. Your mattress should be firm but not too hard. You should sleep on your right side with your head elevated. You should wear a proper nightgown or nightshirt. Married couples were advised to sleep in separate beds to avoid moral corruption, though whether people actually followed this advice is questionable.
The Victorians also believed that certain sleeping positions were healthier than others, and that your character could be judged by how you slept. Sleeping on your back supposedly indicated arrogance. Curling up meant weakness. There was a whole pseudoscience around this stuff. Victorian beds became elaborate status symbols again. We're talking about massive pieces of furniture with ornate headboards and footboards piled high with mattresses and toppers. The very wealthy might have mattresses stuffed with horsehair, which was considered superior to straw or feathers. Sheets and pillowcases were made of linen or cotton, and having pristine white linens became a sign of respectability and cleanliness. But here's where the Victorians actually innovated in a meaningful way. The metal bed frame became popular during this era. Before this,
Wooden bed frames were notorious for harboring bed bugs in their joints and crevices. Metal frames, particularly those made of brass or iron, were much easier to keep clean and were less hospitable to insects. This was a genuine improvement in sleep hygiene. The Victorian era also saw the development of the spring mattress. Before this, mattresses were just cloth sacks stuffed with materials. They'd compress, get limpy, wear out quickly. The coil spring mattress, invented in the mid-1800s, provided much better support and lasted longer. This was a huge leap forward in sleeping comfort. Now, let me take you across the world again, because while Europe and America were industrializing, other parts of the world were developing their own sleeping traditions or maintaining ancient ones. In Japan, during the Edo period, roughly 1603 to 1868, sleeping culture was refined to an art form. The futon system became standardized. Futons would be stored in closets during the day, brought out at night, and laid directly on tatami mat floors. The simplicity was intentional, reflecting Buddhist and Zen principles. Too much attachment to physical comfort was seen as spiritually corrupting. Japanese wooden pillows, called makura, came in various styles. Some were blocks, others were shaped to cradle the neck while keeping the head elevated. This was partly practical to preserve elaborate hairstyles, and partly based on medical theories about blood flow and health. Interestingly, modern research has shown that the neck support these pillows provided was actually beneficial for spinal alignment. In the Ottoman Empire, sleeping arrangements varied dramatically based on social class. The Sultan and his family lived in opulent luxury at Topkapi Palace. Their sleeping chambers were filled with silk cushions, ornate carpets, and they slept on low divans piled with bedding. The harem, where the Sultan's wives and concubines lived, had its own elaborate sleeping quarters, though the reality was less glamorous than the Orientalist fantasies Europeans had about it. Ordinary Ottoman subjects slept on carpets or thin mattresses on the floor, often in multi-generational family groups. The concept of furniture-based sleeping was more European. In much of the Middle East, Asia, and North Africa, sleeping on or near the floor remained the norm. In India, sleeping practices varied wildly across regions, religions, and castes. In hot regions, people might sleep outside on charpoys, which are woven bed frames that allow air circulation. In cooler mountain regions, heavy blankets and enclosed sleeping areas were necessary. The caste system meant that sleeping arrangements were also markers of social status. Who you slept near, what materials your bedding was made from, all of it signaled your place in society. Hindu and Buddhist religious practices influenced sleep as well. Certain sleeping directions were considered auspicious or inauspicious based on spiritual beliefs. Sleeping with your head pointing north was often avoided because of beliefs about the Earth's magnetic field and the direction of the departed soul. Let's jump to the 19th century in America, because the country was expanding westward, and sleep on the frontier was its own unique adventure. Pioneers heading west on wagon trains faced brutal sleeping conditions. You were sleeping in or under your wagon if you had one, on the ground with minimal bedding if you didn't. The dangers were real: stampeding buffalo, rattlesnakes, scorpions, sudden storms, and the constant threat of conflicts with Native Americans whose land was being invaded. Sleep was light, anxious, always alert.
Cowboys on cattle drives might sleep 80 to 100 nights a year out under the open sky. Their bed was a bedroll, basically a canvas tarp wrapped around blankets. You'd lay it on the ground, hopefully checking first for rocks, cacti, or anthills. The saddle became your pillow. In rain, you'd pull the tarp over yourself and hope you didn't drown. Cowboys learned to sleep through almost anything: thunder, the movement of cattle, the sounds of other men snoring and farting in close proximity. But there was something about sleeping under the stars that captured the American imagination. The vastness of the sky, the Milky Way visible in all its glory before light pollution,
the sense of freedom and possibility. Lots of cowboys, miners, and frontier settlers wrote about how much they actually preferred sleeping outdoors to being cooped up inside. There's something primal about sleeping under the open sky that resonates with humans even now. Mining towns and boom towns that sprang up across the West had their own sleeping culture. Men vastly outnumbered women, and accommodations were rough. You might pay for a spot in a bunkhouse where a dozen guys slept in one room on crude wooden bunks. The snoring, the smell, the lack of privacy, it was all part of the deal. Fights were common. So were lice, bed bugs, and disease. Saloons and brothels stayed open late, catering to men who worked hard and played hard. For the first time in American history, a significant population of men were living without families, without domestic structures, choosing to sleep in communal male spaces. This had social impacts that historians are still analyzing. Now, let's get to a development that changed human sleep forever: artificial light. For all of human history up until the late 19th century, nighttime was dark, really dark. Sure, you could have a candle or an oil lamp, but these were expensive to maintain and provided very limited light. Most people spent evenings in semi-darkness or full darkness. This meant bedtime naturally came early for most folks. Then came gas lighting in the early 1800s, which lit up city streets and some homes. This was revolutionary, but still limited. The real game changer was the electric light bulb. Thomas Edison's practical incandescent bulb, developed in the late 1770s and early 1880s, changed everything. Suddenly, you could turn night into day. Factories could run 24 hours with properly lit facilities. Homes could stay brightly lit in the evening. People could read, socialize, and work long after sunset without straining their eyes or burning through expensive candles. It sounds awesome, right? And in many ways it was. But it also meant that humans started ignoring their natural circadian rhythms on a mass scale. Before electric light, people generally slept more in winter and less in summer, following natural light cycles. They practiced that biphasic sleep pattern I mentioned earlier, with a wakeful period in the middle of the night. Electric light disrupted all of that. Suddenly, you could maintain the same schedule year-round. You could stay up as late as you wanted. Bedtime became a choice rather than a necessity imposed by darkness. The impact on human health has been massive, and we're only now fully understanding it. Exposure to artificial light, especially blue light from screens, suppresses melatonin production. This is the hormone that makes us sleepy. Our brains think it's daytime when it's not. We go to bed later, wake up to alarm clocks rather than naturally, and never feel fully rested. Modern sleep problems, insomnia, sleep deprivation, all of these have roots in artificial light. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's stay in the late 19th and early 20th centuries for now. The late 1900s and early 1900s saw rapid urbanization. People flooded into cities for factory jobs. This meant more people living in apartments and tenements, less connection to natural rhythms, more noise, more light pollution, more stress. Sleep became something you tried to squeeze in between shifts rather than a natural process. But it was also a time of growing awareness about public health. Reformers started pushing for better working conditions, including limits on working hours. The 8-hour workday movement gained traction. The idea was simple: 8 hours for work, 8 hours for recreation, 8 hours for rest. This seems obvious now, but it was radical at the time. Factory owners fought it tooth and nail. There were also reforms in housing. Tenement reform movements pushed for better ventilation, more windows, and minimum space requirements. The connection between poor sleeping conditions and disease became clear. Tuberculosis, which was a massive killer, spread easily in overcrowded sleeping quarters. Improving how and where people slept became a public health priority.
The early 20th century brought another massive change: World War I. Millions of men from around the world were thrown into trenches, forced to sleep in conditions that were absolutely hellish. Soldiers slept in mud, in cold, in constant danger. The psychological trauma of trying to sleep while artillery shells exploded, while poison gas might drift through your trench, while rats crawled over you. This created an entire generation with what we now recognize as PTSD. Shell shock, as they called it then, was partly a sleep disorder. Soldiers couldn't sleep without nightmares. They'd startle awake at the slightest sound. Some lost the ability to sleep normally for the rest of their lives. The war made it clear that sleep wasn't just a physical need, it was crucial for mental health. The interwar period, the 1920s and 30s, saw continued innovation in sleeping technology. The inner spring mattress was improved and mass-produced. Adjustable bed frames were invented. Waterbeds were actually patented in the early 1900s, though they didn't become popular until much later. The 1920s also saw changes in social attitudes about sleep and bedrooms. The idea of master bedrooms in middle-class homes became standard. Children having their own rooms became a goal for families that could afford it. Privacy during sleep went from being a luxury of the wealthy to an expectation of the middle class. But then came the Great Depression, and millions of people lost their homes, their jobs, and their ability to afford basic sleeping necessities. Hobo camps sprung up where homeless men slept rough, under bridges and makeshift shelters. The photographs from this era show the desperation. People sleeping on park benches, huddled in doorways, entire families living in their cars. The Depression also forced many families to double up. Adult children moved back home. Multiple families shared housing. The privacy and separate bedrooms that middle-class Americans had started to expect disappeared for many. You slept where you could, grateful just to have a roof over your head. World War II brought its own sleeping disruptions. Soldiers sleeping in trenches, foxholes, bombed-out buildings, civilians sleeping in bomb shelters during air raids. The London Blitz saw thousands of people sleeping in underground stations, night after night, seeking safety from German bombs. Families would bring bedding and claim spots on the platforms. Communities formed in these shelters. People fell in love, babies were born, life went on in the underground. On the Pacific Front, American and Japanese soldiers slept in jungles, on ships, in the most hostile conditions imaginable. Heat, humidity, disease-carrying insects, the constant threat of attack. Many soldiers talked about how they never felt truly rested for years. After the war, there was a boom in suburban development in America. The GI Bill helped veterans buy homes. These new suburban houses had multiple bedrooms, often with children's rooms separated from the master bedroom. This became the American ideal, a house where everyone had their own space, where sleep was private and individual. The 1950s and 60s were when sleep started being studied scientifically in a serious way. In 1953, researchers discovered REM sleep, the rapid eye movement stage where most dreaming occurs. This was huge. For the first time, scientists could see that sleep wasn't just unconsciousness. It was an active process with distinct stages, each serving different functions. Sleep labs were established where people would sleep with electrodes attached to their heads, measuring brain waves. The field of sleep medicine was born. Doctors began recognizing sleep disorders as real medical conditions. Sleep apnea, narcolepsy, insomnia, these got names and treatments. The 1960s also saw some weird sleep experimentation. People tried polyphasic sleep schedules, sleeping in multiple short bursts throughout the day instead of one long nighttime sleep. The idea was to maximize waking hours. Some claimed it worked great. Most found it unsustainable and went back to normal schedules.
Waterbeds became a fad in the late 60s and 70s. They were marketed as the ultimate in comfort and even as having health benefits. Some people loved them, others found them nauseating. The real problem was that they were heavy, prone to leaking, and hard to move. They've mostly disappeared now, but for a while they were everywhere. The 1970s and 80s brought the rise of consumer culture around sleep. Mattress stores became common, brands competed on comfort, support, and durability. Sleep became something you could shop for, optimize, improve with the right purchases. This was a dramatic shift from sleep being something that just happened however you could manage it. Let me pause here and ask you something. Are you still awake, or are you drifting off? Either way is fine. This story is designed to work whether you're fully alert or starting to doze. But if you're enjoying this journey through sleep history, definitely subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss future videos. And leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what your sleep situation is like. I'm genuinely curious. All right, let's continue into the late 20th century, and then we'll bring this full circle to today. The 1980s and 90s saw an explosion in sleep research. Scientists discovered the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the tiny part of the brain that acts as your master clock, regulating circadian rhythms. They figured out how light affects this clock, why jet lag happens, and how shift work disrupts normal sleep patterns. Memory foam mattresses were developed by NASA in the 1960s, but didn't become commercially available until the 1990s. These mattresses conformed to your body, providing support while relieving pressure points. They were expensive at first, but prices came down. Now memory foam is everywhere. The internet changed everything, including sleep. Suddenly, people could work, shop, socialize, and be entertained 24 hours a day without leaving home. The temptation to stay up late browsing the web, then checking email, then social media, it's been devastating for sleep schedules. Sleep deprivation became a badge of honor in certain cultures, especially in tech and business. CEOs bragged about sleeping 4 hours a night. The idea that you could sleep when you're dead, that successful people don't need much sleep, this became weirdly prevalent. It was stupid then, and it's stupid now. Sleep is not optional, it's essential. But there was also a counter-movement. Sleep advocacy started growing in the 2000s and 2010s. Researchers like Matthew Walker published popular books explaining why sleep matters. Athletes started talking about how they prioritize sleep for performance. The tide started turning back toward recognizing sleep as crucial. The smartphone, especially after the iPhone launched in 2007, brought a new challenge. Now, people had glowing screens in their bedrooms, often checking them right before sleep or even in the middle of the night. The blue light from these screens is particularly good at suppressing melatonin. We've basically created the perfect device for disrupting sleep and then made it ubiquitous. Sleep tracking became a thing, first with specialized devices, then with smartwatches and apps that claim to monitor your sleep stages. The accuracy varies, but the awareness it creates can be helpful. People started seeing data on how little quality sleep they were actually getting.
The COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 and beyond disrupted sleep patterns globally. People working from home lost the structure of commutes and office hours. Many slept worse due to stress and anxiety. Others actually slept better because they could follow their natural rhythms without early alarm clocks. It was a massive, unintentional experiment in how environment affects sleep. Now, here in 2025, we're in an interesting place. We know more about sleep than ever before. We understand circadian rhythms, sleep stages, the glymphatic system that cleans your brain during sleep, the connection between sleep and everything from immune function to mental health to longevity. We have better mattresses, climate-controlled bedrooms, apps to help us sleep, medications if we need them. But we're also more sleep-deprived than ever as a society. We're fighting against millions of years of evolution, staying up late under artificial lights, staring at screens, drinking caffeine at all hours, stressing about everything. We've created an environment that's hostile to good sleep.
and then wonder why we're tired all the time. So what can we learn from our ancestors? What did they get right about sleep that we've forgotten? First, darkness matters. Our ancestors slept in true darkness, or at most with dim firelight. They didn't have LED alarm clocks, street lights streaming through windows, or phones lighting up with notifications. Their brains got the clear signal that it was time for sleep. We need to reclaim darkness in our bedrooms. Second, temperature matters. Many ancient people slept in cooler conditions than we maintain in our climate-controlled homes. Your body temperature needs to drop for good sleep to occur. A cooler bedroom, around 60 to 67 degrees Fahrenheit, is actually optimal. Our ancestors knew this instinctively because they had no choice. Third, regularity matters. Even though ancient people didn't have clocks, they followed natural rhythms. They woke with the sun, slept when it got dark, with seasonal variations. Our bodies crave this regularity. Going to bed and waking up at consistent times, even on weekends, dramatically improves sleep quality. Fourth, physical exhaustion helps. Our ancestors were physically active all day, every day, hunting, gathering, farming, walking miles, doing manual labor. They arrived at sleep genuinely tired. Modern sedentary lifestyles mean we're mentally exhausted, but not physically tired. Our bodies don't know what to do with that. Regular physical activity, preferably earlier in the day, helps. Fifth, social connection around sleep matters. For most of human history, people didn't sleep in isolation. They slept near family, near their tribe, in the presence of others. This created a sense of safety. Extreme isolation during sleep is actually pretty recent. For people who struggle with sleep anxiety, having a pet in the room or even just knowing other people are nearby can help. Sixth, natural materials for bedding. Our ancestors slept on furs, cotton, wool, plant fibers. These materials breathe, wick away moisture, and regulate temperature naturally. Synthetic materials in modern bedding often trap heat and moisture, disrupting sleep. There's been a movement back toward natural materials like cotton, linen, and wool for good reason. Seventh, accepting sleep variation. Ancient people probably slept more in winter, less in summer. They adapted to circumstances. We try to force 8 hours every single night, regardless of season, stress, or life circumstances. Some flexibility and self-compassion around sleep might actually reduce the anxiety that prevents sleep.
Eighth, that biphasic sleep pattern I mentioned. For most of human history, waking in the middle of the night for an hour or two was normal. It was a time for quiet activities, intimacy, reflection. We've been taught that waking up at night is a problem, that we must sleep through or we're broken. But maybe that wakeful period is natural for some people. Instead of stressing about it, you could embrace it. Now, I'm not suggesting we should all go back to sleeping on the ground in caves. Modern sleep science has given us genuine improvements. Good mattresses that support spinal alignment, treatment for sleep disorders like apnea, understanding of how sleep affects health. These are valuable. But we've also lost something. We've lost the darkness, the natural rhythms, the simplicity. We've made sleep into a performance, something to optimize and track and stress about. Maybe the best sleep lesson from our ancestors is that sleep is just sleep. It's natural, it's essential. It doesn't need to be complicated. Throughout this journey, from those first proto-humans building nests in trees millions of years ago, through countless civilizations and cultures across continents and centuries, humans have always found ways to sleep. In caves and castles, on ships and in trenches, in luxury and in poverty. We've adapted, we've innovated, we've survived. The story of human sleep is really the story of human adaptability. No matter what challenges we faced, we figured out how to rest, how to restore ourselves, how to wake up and face another day. That's pretty amazing when you think about it. And here's the thing that might blow your mind.
The way you sleep right now in your modern bed with your pillows and your climate control and your white noise machine, you're part of this story. You're the latest chapter in millions of years of humans figuring out how to rest safely in a dangerous world. Every comfort you take for granted, somebody suffered without it. Every innovation in your bedroom has a history of trial and error behind it. Let me tell you about some sleep innovations and practices from around the world that you might not know about, because the story of sleep is truly global, and every culture has contributed something unique. In Scandinavia, particularly in countries like Norway and Sweden, there's a practice called friluftsliv, which roughly translates to open-air living. Part of this philosophy involves sleeping outdoors or with windows wide open, even in winter. Norwegian babies are routinely put outside in their strollers for naps, even in freezing temperatures, bundled up warm. The belief is that cold, fresh air leads to deeper, healthier sleep. And you know what? The research actually supports this. Cold exposure can improve sleep quality and boost immune function. The Scandinavians also pioneered the separate duvet system. Instead of sharing one large blanket or comforter, each person in the bed has their own. This prevents the blanket hogging wars that many couples experience. It allows each person to regulate their own temperature. Simple, but genius. This practice is becoming more popular in other countries as people discover how much it improves sleep. Let's talk about the Middle East and North Africa, where sleeping on rooftops has been practiced for thousands of years and continues today. In cities like Cairo, Baghdad, or Marrakesh, many traditional homes have flat roofs that become sleeping spaces on hot summer nights. Entire families move up to the roof where breezes provide relief from the stifling heat below. There's something communal and social about it. Neighbors can see and talk to each other from rooftop to rooftop. The stars are overhead. It's sleeping, but it's also a social practice.
In Mongolia, nomadic herders still live in gurs, which we sometimes call yurts. These are portable round tents made of felt and wood that can be disassembled and moved as the herds move to new pasture. Inside a gur, sleeping arrangements follow strict traditional patterns. The back of the gur, opposite the door, is the most honored position. Elders and guests sleep there. Younger family members sleep closer to the door. Everyone sleeps on raised platforms or thick felt mats, protected from the ground's cold. In winter, with temperatures dropping to -40 degrees or lower, the central stove keeps the gur warm, but you're still sleeping in essentially a tent on the open steppe. These nomadic herders are tough as nails. In tropical regions of Southeast Asia, Thailand, Indonesia, the Philippines, traditional houses are often built on stilts. This serves multiple purposes: flood protection, ventilation, and keeping snakes and other critters out. Sleeping platforms are typically made of bamboo or wood, elevated off the ground. The construction allows air to flow underneath and through the house, providing natural cooling. No air conditioning needed. Modern architecture in hot climates is slowly rediscovering these traditional wisdom principles. The Maori people of New Zealand traditionally slept in wade, meeting houses that served as communal sleeping spaces during gatherings. The elaborate carvings and woven panels inside these structures weren't just decorative. They told stories of ancestors, creating a space where the living slept surrounded by the spiritual presence of those who came before. Sleep in Maori culture, as in many indigenous cultures, isn't separate from spiritual life. It's integrated. In Arctic regions beyond the Inuit, the Sami people of northern Scandinavia developed their own cold weather sleeping practices. They used lavu, which are tent structures similar to teepees, and slept on reindeer hides, which are incredibly insulating. The hollow hairs of reindeer fur trap air, creating natural insulation that's hard to beat. Modern synthetic sleeping bags try to replicate what reindeer fur does naturally. Let's dive into some specific historical figures and their sleep habits.
because the way powerful or creative people slept often influenced their achievements and their failures. Leonardo da Vinci supposedly practiced polyphasic sleep, taking short naps throughout the day instead of one long sleep at night. The story goes that he'd sleep 15 to 20 minutes every 4 hours, giving him more waking hours to work. Whether this is true or exaggerated is debatable, but it's become part of his legend. What we do know is that Da Vinci was obsessive about his work and probably didn't sleep conventionally. Napoleon Bonaparte allegedly slept very little, maybe 4 hours a night, and bragged about it. He believed sleep was for the weak and that a great man needed only a few hours. But historical records also show he took frequent naps during the day, sometimes at crucial moments during military campaigns. His famous ability to fall asleep quickly before battles might have been a survival mechanism, grabbing rest whenever possible. Thomas Edison, the inventor we talked about earlier, publicly claimed he slept only 4 or 5 hours a night and said that sleep was a waste of time. But his employees and family reported that he napped frequently throughout the day. There are photographs of Edison sleeping at his desk. He clearly needed more sleep than he admitted. His public stance about sleep being unnecessary might have contributed to the modern culture of sleep deprivation as a status symbol. Martha Stewart, the lifestyle guru, has talked about sleeping 4 hours a night for decades. She gets up at 4 a.m. and works until late. At 70+ years old, she maintains this schedule. How? Genetics probably play a role. Some people genuinely need less sleep than others due to genetic variations, but they're rare. For most people, trying to function on 4 hours is disastrous.
Margaret Thatcher, the British Prime Minister, famously slept only 4 hours a night while in office. She saw it as a point of pride, a demonstration of her dedication and toughness. But after leaving office, she slept much more. Some historians have suggested that chronic sleep deprivation affected her decision-making in her final years as PM. Mariah Carey, the singer, has said she needs 15 hours of sleep to maintain her voice and health. She sleeps in a room with humidifiers, creating a controlled environment. For most people, sleeping 15 hours regularly would actually feel terrible. But Carey has found what works for her body and her demanding career. The point of all these examples is that sleep needs are individual, but they're also not optional. The people who claimed to sleep very little either supplemented with naps, paid for it with health problems, or were genetic outliers. For the vast majority of humans, 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night is necessary for optimal health and functioning. Now, let's talk about dreams, because no discussion of sleep is complete without addressing what happens in our minds while we're unconscious. Ancient civilizations took dreams very seriously. The Egyptians believed dreams were messages from the gods. They had dream temples where people would go to receive divine guidance through dreams. Priests would interpret these dreams. The Egyptians even wrote dream dictionaries, like the Chester Beatty Papyrus, which lists dreams and their meanings. The ancient Greeks had a similar practice. The cult of Asclepius, the god of healing, operated temples where sick people would come to sleep in hopes of receiving healing dreams. The god would supposedly appear in the dream and provide treatment or advice. This practice, called incubation, was incredibly popular. The remains of these dream temples can still be visited in Greece today. In the Hebrew Bible, dreams play a crucial role. Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams, predicting 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. Daniel interprets Nebuchadnezzar's dreams. God speaks to prophets in dreams. The idea that dreams could predict the future or carry divine messages was woven into Jewish and later Christian and Islamic theology. Native American cultures across North America placed enormous importance on dreams. Vision quests, where young people would go into the wilderness to fast and seek dreams that would guide their lives, were common practices. Dreams were seen as a way to contact the spirit world,
receive guidance from ancestors, or discover your purpose. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia have the concept of the dream time, which is both a creation mythology and a state of being that connects past, present, and future. Dreams are a way of accessing this eternal realm. The distinction between waking and dreaming reality is less rigid in Aboriginal cosmology than in Western thought. In many African cultures, dreams are seen as a meeting place with ancestors. The dead can communicate with the living through dreams, offering advice, warnings, or blessings. Ignoring messages in dreams is considered dangerous and disrespectful to the ancestors. When Western science began studying dreams in the 20th century, the approach was very different. Sigmund Freud published The Interpretation of Dreams in 1900, arguing that dreams were the unconscious mind expressing repressed desires, usually sexual. His student, Carl Jung, later proposed that dreams drew on a collective unconscious shared by all humans, full of archetypes and symbols that transcended individual experience. Modern neuroscience has a different view. Dreams are now understood as the brain processing memories, consolidating learning, and working through emotions. During REM sleep, when most vivid dreaming occurs, your brain is incredibly active. It's sorting through the day's experiences, deciding what to keep and what to discard, strengthening important neural connections. But here's the fascinating thing. The scientific explanation doesn't necessarily contradict the spiritual or psychological interpretations. If your brain is processing emotional material, working through problems, and accessing deep memories during dreams, then of course dreams might feel meaningful and provide insights. The ancients were right that dreams matter, even if the mechanism isn't divine messages. Lucid dreaming, the ability to know you're dreaming while you're dreaming and potentially control the dream, has been practiced in various cultures for centuries. Tibetan Buddhist monks practice dream yoga, learning to become conscious in their dreams as a spiritual discipline. In the West, lucid dreaming became popular in the 1970s and 80s, with people learning techniques to induce lucid dreams.
Nightmares have been recognized throughout history as a special category of dream. The word nightmare literally comes from night and mare, an Old English term for a demon that sits on your chest and causes bad dreams. Sleep paralysis, where you wake up but can't move for a few moments, was often interpreted as demonic attack. The feeling of a weight on your chest, the sense of a presence in the room, these are common features of sleep paralysis that people across cultures have experienced and interpreted through their own spiritual frameworks. PTSD nightmares are a modern area of research, but the phenomenon is ancient. Warriors and survivors of trauma have always had recurring nightmares. Modern treatment approaches include image rehearsal therapy, where you consciously rewrite the nightmare while awake, and medications that reduce the vividness of dreams. But the basic human experience of being haunted by traumatic memories during sleep is timeless. Let's talk about sleep disorders, because while modern medicine has names and treatments for these conditions, humans have been suffering from them forever. Insomnia, the inability to fall asleep or stay asleep, has plagued humans throughout history. Ancient remedies included alcohol, which does make you drowsy but actually disrupts sleep quality. Opium and its derivatives were used in many cultures, effectively but with obvious addiction risks. Herbal remedies like valerian root, chamomile, lavender, and passion flower have been used for centuries, and modern research suggests some of them actually do have mild sedative effects. Medieval and Renaissance doctors recommended all kinds of things for insomnia: bloodletting, which was their solution for everything, special diets, prayer and confession on the theory that guilt kept you awake, sleeping facing certain directions. Most of it didn't work, but it shows that insomnia was recognized as a serious problem. Sleep apnea, where breathing stops repeatedly during sleep, is more common in overweight individuals, so it's become more prevalent as obesity has increased, but it existed in earlier times too. The loud snoring followed by gasps that characterize apnea was noted in medical literature going back centuries. The condition was sometimes called Pickwickian syndrome, after a character in a Charles Dickens novel who was fat and always falling asleep. Without modern CPAP machines that keep airways open, severe apnea could be fatal. Restless leg syndrome, that irresistible urge to move your legs, especially trying to sleep, was described in medical texts as far back as the 17th century. It was called anxietas tibiarum, or leg anxiety. Treatments were mostly ineffective. People just suffered with it. Narcolepsy, where people fall asleep suddenly during the day, was first described medically in the late 1800s, but people had obviously been experiencing it forever. Without understanding the neurological basis, narcolepsy would have been terrifying and inexplicable. Imagine falling asleep without warning, sometimes with cataplexy, where your muscles go limp. In superstitious times, this might have been seen as possession or a curse. Sleepwalking has been documented throughout history and across cultures. People have been known to do complex activities while asleep, like cooking, walking long distances, even driving cars in modern times. Legal cases have involved people committing crimes while sleepwalking, raising questions about responsibility and consciousness. Shakespeare's Lady Macbeth famously sleepwalks while obsessively washing her hands, unable to clean the guilt from her conscience. Shakespeare understood that sleepwalking revealed inner psychological states. Night terrors, especially in children, where they seem awake but are actually still asleep and in a state of intense fear, have probably scared the hell out of parents throughout history. Kids experiencing night terrors can scream, thrash around, and seem inconsolable, but they usually don't remember it in the morning. Before understanding this as a sleep disorder, it might have been interpreted as demonic attack or possession. Let's shift gears and talk about some modern sleep innovations and where sleep science is heading. The adjustable bed, originally developed for hospitals to help patients with various medical conditions, has become a consumer product. Being able to elevate your head or feet can help with acid reflux, sleep apnea, snoring, and circulation problems. It's not just for old people anymore. Lots of younger people are discovering the benefits. Weighted blankets, which provide deep pressure stimulation, have become incredibly popular for anxiety and insomnia. The gentle pressure mimics being hugged and can increase serotonin and melatonin while decreasing cortisol. This is an example of the science catching up to what some people instinctively knew, that being under something heavy feels comforting and helps sleep.
Smart mattresses that track your sleep, adjust firmness, and regulate temperature are now available. They cost a fortune, but they represent where sleep technology is heading. Your mattress can learn your patterns, wake you up at the optimal point in your sleep cycle, and even adjust differently for each person if you share a bed. Sleep medications have evolved from knockout drugs with terrible side effects to more targeted options. Modern sleep aids try to work with your natural sleep mechanisms rather than just sedating you, but they're still overprescribed and often have dependency issues. The ideal is to fix sleep naturally through behavioral changes, but sometimes medication is necessary. Cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBTI, has been shown to be more effective long-term than medication. It addresses the thoughts, behaviors, and habits that interfere with sleep. Things like only using your bed for sleep and sex, not for watching TV or scrolling your phone. Going to bed and waking up at the same time every day. Creating a wind-down routine. This is basically codifying good sleep hygiene into a treatment protocol, and it works. Light therapy, using bright lights that mimic sunlight, can help reset circadian rhythms for people dealing with shift work, jet lag, or seasonal affective disorder. This is based on understanding how light affects the suprachiasmatic nucleus in your brain. By carefully timing light exposure, you can shift your biological clock. There's growing interest in binaural beats and other audio technologies that claim to induce sleep by entraining brainwaves. The science is mixed, but some people swear by them.
White noise, pink noise, and brown noise machines are more established. These mask disruptive sounds and can help people sleep in noisy environments. Sleep tourism is actually a thing now. Luxury hotels offering sleep-focused stays with special mattresses, complete darkness, sound isolation, and even sleep consultations. Destination spas where you go specifically to reset your sleep patterns. This would have seemed absurd to earlier generations who just slept wherever they could, but it reflects how much we've come to value sleep and how difficult it's become in our overstimulated world. Now, let me blow your mind with some cutting-edge sleep research that's happening right now. Scientists have discovered that the brain has a waste removal system called the glymphatic system that's most active during sleep. Cerebrospinal fluid flushes through the brain, clearing out toxic proteins, including beta amyloid, which is associated with Alzheimer's disease. This is huge. It means sleep isn't just rest, it's literally cleaning your brain. Chronic sleep deprivation might contribute to dementia by preventing this cleaning process. Research into sleep's role in immune function has shown that people who don't sleep enough get sick more often and take longer to recover. During deep sleep, your immune system releases proteins called cytokines that help fight infection and inflammation. Sleep deprivation reduces these protective proteins. This is why you feel tired when you're sick. Your body is forcing you to sleep so your immune system can work. The connection between sleep and mental health is increasingly clear. Insomnia is both a symptom and a cause of depression and anxiety. Improving sleep can improve mental health outcomes, and treating mental health issues can improve sleep. They're bidirectionally linked in ways we're only beginning to understand. Sleep and creativity have a proven connection. The famous story about the structure of benzene coming to a chemist in a dream isn't unique. Many breakthroughs in science, art, and problem-solving have come during or immediately after sleep. The REM stage in particular seems to facilitate the kind of lateral thinking that produces creative insights. The gut microbiome, believe it or not, affects sleep. The bacteria in your digestive system produce neurotransmitters, including serotonin, which is a precursor to melatonin. An unhealthy gut can mean poor sleep. This connection between diet, gut health, and sleep is an emerging area of research, with practical implications.
Chronotypes, the natural variation in when people feel alert and tired, are increasingly recognized as important. You've heard of morning larks and night owls. These aren't just preferences, they're based on genetic differences in circadian rhythms. Forcing a natural night owl to wake up at 6 a.m. every day is fighting against their biology. There's a movement toward flexible work schedules that accommodate different chronotypes. Social jet lag, the mismatch between your natural sleep schedule and the schedule society forces on you, affects millions of people. You sleep late on weekends because that's when your body naturally wants to sleep, then struggle on Monday morning. This constant shifting is harmful. It's like crossing time zones every weekend. Some researchers argue that school and work should start later to accommodate biology, especially for teenagers, whose circadian rhythms naturally shift later during adolescence. Speaking of teenagers, let's talk about how sleep needs change across the lifespan, because this is something our ancestors probably understood better than we do. Babies sleep a lot, but not for long stretches. Newborns sleep 16 to 17 hours a day, but wake every few hours to feed. This is normal and necessary. Our modern expectation that babies should sleep through the night from a young age is actually weird historically. For most of human history, babies slept near or on their mothers, waking to nurse throughout the night. The separate nursery with a baby sleeping alone through the night is a modern Western invention that goes against millions of years of mammalian behavior. Toddlers and young children need about 11 to 14 hours of sleep, including naps. They're growing rapidly, learning constantly, and processing enormous amounts of information. Ever notice how kids sometimes seem to regress in behavior when they're not sleeping enough? That's their developing brains not getting the rest they need to function. School-age children need 9 to 12 hours, but school start times, homework, extracurriculars, and screens all conspire to reduce this. The epidemic of tired, cranky kids is partly a sleep deprivation epidemic. Some schools have experimented with later start times and seen improved grades, better behavior, and fewer mental health issues. Teenagers need 8 to 10 hours, but their circadian rhythms shift naturally during puberty. Teens literally cannot fall asleep as early as they did as children. Their melatonin release happens later. Then we force them to wake up at 6 or 7 a.m. for school. We're basically torturing them. High school should start at 9 or 10 a.m. based on the biology of teenage sleep. Some school districts that have made this change have seen dramatic improvements. Adults generally need 7 to 9 hours, though individual variation exists. The idea that you can train yourself to need less sleep is mostly false. You can get used to being sleep deprived, but that doesn't mean you're functioning well. Studies show that people who sleep 6 hours a night think they're adapting, but their cognitive performance progressively declines. They just lose the ability to perceive how impaired they are. Older adults often sleep more lightly and wake more frequently during the night. Deep sleep decreases with age. This is normal aging, but it's often compounded by medical conditions, medications, and pain. The stereotype of elderly people napping a lot exists because nighttime sleep becomes less restorative. But healthy older adults still need 7 to 8 hours of sleep in a 24-hour period. Throughout the lifespan, sleep is when growth happens, when memories consolidate, when emotional regulation occurs, when the immune system strengthens. It's not a luxury, it's a biological necessity, as fundamental as eating or breathing.
Before we wrap up this incredible journey through time, I want to hit you with some practical takeaways. Things you can actually do to improve your sleep based on thousands of years of human experience and modern science combined. 1. Darkness is your friend. Make your bedroom as dark as possible. Black out curtains, cover or remove electronic displays, no phone screens. Your ancestors slept in true darkness, and their brains knew it was time for sleep. Give your brain the same clear signal. 2. Cool it down. Your bedroom should be between 60 and 67 degrees Fahrenheit for optimal sleep. Your body temperature needs to drop to initiate sleep. A cool room helps this happen. Warm hands and feet with cool core temperature is the ideal. 3. Consistency is key. Go to bed and wake up at the same time every day, even weekends. Your circadian rhythm craves regularity. Every time you sleep in late on Saturday, you're giving yourself mild jet lag. 4. Wind down properly. Create a routine that signals to your body that sleep is coming. Maybe it's reading, stretching, meditation, or a warm bath. Do the same things in the same order each night. Your brain will learn the pattern. 5. Get some sunlight exposure during the day, especially in the morning. This helps set your circadian rhythm. Our ancestors woke up to sunlight. You might wake up to an alarm in a dark room, but getting outside soon after waking helps your brain know it's daytime. 6. Move your body during the day. Physical activity promotes better sleep, but not too close to bedtime. Our ancestors were physically active all day. You might sit at a desk. Make time for movement. 7. Watch what you consume. Caffeine has a half-life of about 6 hours, meaning if you have coffee at 4 p.m., half of it is still in your system at 10 p.m. Alcohol might make you drowsy, but it ruins sleep quality, especially deep sleep and REM sleep. Heavy meals close to bedtime force your digestive system to work when it should be resting. 8. Use your bed only for sleep and sex, not for work, not for scrolling your phone, not for watching TV. This classical conditioning helps your brain associate bed with sleep.
9. If you can't sleep after 20 minutes, get up and do something boring in dim light until you feel sleepy. Lying there stressing about not sleeping just creates anxiety around your bed. 10. Consider your mattress and pillows. They don't last forever. If your mattress is over 8 years old or you wake up with aches, it might be time to replace it. Pillows should support your neck in alignment with your spine. Now, I want to address something important. If you're lying here listening to this, maybe drifting in and out, maybe you've got sleep issues you're dealing with, chronic insomnia, sleep apnea, restless legs, whatever it is, please talk to a doctor or a sleep specialist. Sleep disorders are real medical conditions. They're not character flaws or signs of weakness. Our ancestors who couldn't sleep well probably struggled immensely, but they didn't have access to help. You do. Sleep medicine has come so far. CPAP machines for apnea can be life-changing. CBTI for insomnia works. There are treatments for most sleep disorders. You don't have to suffer alone. And if you're sleeping well, if you're one of the lucky ones who lays down and just conks out, be grateful. Good sleep is a gift. It's something your ancestors would have envied. Don't take it for granted. We've traveled together from trees in prehistoric Africa to the bedrooms of 2025. We've seen how humans have slept in every imaginable circumstance, in every climate, through every era. We've adapted, innovated, and survived. The story of sleep is ultimately a story of resilience and ingenuity. Every night when you lie down to sleep, you're participating in a ritual as old as humanity itself. You're vulnerable, unconscious, completely defenseless, and yet you surrender to it because you must. Sleep is the ultimate act of trust. Trust that you'll wake up. Trust that you'll be safe. Trust that tomorrow is coming. Our ancestors sleeping in caves with predators outside, they had to trust too. Medieval peasants crowded together in drafty cottages, soldiers in trenches, slaves in cabins, immigrants in tenements. Every single one of them closed their eyes and hoped for rest, hoped for dawn, hoped for a better tomorrow.
And here you are, the product of every human who came before you, who survived long enough to reproduce, who slept well enough to function, who woke up one more day. You carry their resilience in your genes. Their adaptability is your inheritance. The modern world has given you challenges they never faced. Light pollution, noise pollution, stress, screens, always-on culture. But it's also given you knowledge. You understand sleep in ways they never could. You have tools they would have considered magical. You have choices they didn't have. So choose wisely. Choose to prioritize sleep. Choose to create an environment that honors this ancient need. Choose to fight back against the cultural forces that want to steal your rest. Because sleep isn't laziness. Sleep isn't giving up. Sleep isn't wasted time. Sleep is when you heal, when you grow, when you process emotions, when your brain cleans itself, when your immune system strengthens, when memories solidify, when creativity sparks, when your body repairs the damage of the day. Sleep is when you're most yourself, floating in dreams that connect you to something deeper than waking consciousness. It's when you touch the mysterious, the unconscious, maybe even the divine, depending on your beliefs. And in the morning, when you wake up, you're reborn. Another day, another chance, another opportunity to live the life your ancestors dreamed about when they huddled around fires in the darkness, telling stories and hoping their children would have it better. You are their dream come true. You're sleeping in comfort they couldn't imagine, with safety they never had. You owe it to them and to yourself to sleep well, to rest fully, to wake up ready to make the most of this gift called life. So tonight, or whenever you next lay down to sleep,
remember this journey. Remember that humans have been figuring out how to rest for millions of years. Remember that you're connected to all of them. Remember that sleep is sacred, necessary, and beautiful. And then let yourself drift off. Let the darkness take you. Let your consciousness dissolve into dreams. Let your body do what it knows how to do. Trust the process that's older than civilization, older than language, older than humanity itself. Sleep well, friend. You've earned it. We all have. If you made it this far, you're an absolute legend. Thank you for taking this journey with me through the history of human sleep. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I've got so many more stories to tell you about how humans have lived, survived, and thrived throughout history. Drop a comment and let me know what you thought of this deep dive. What surprised you the most? What historical period sleeping arrangements would you most or least want to experience? And what topic should I cover next? I read every comment, and your suggestions help shape what I create. And hit that like button if you enjoyed this. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know that these long-form, deeply researched historical narratives are what you want to see more of. Until next time, sleep tight. Don't let the bedbugs bite. Though now you know, our ancestors definitely did have bedbugs and just dealt with it. Modern pest control is something to be genuinely thankful for. Sweet dreams, and remember, every night when you sleep, you're continuing a story that began in the trees of Africa millions of years ago. You're the latest chapter in the greatest survival story ever told. Good night.